I read 9 books in the 8th week of 2026, so let's go over my thoughts and ratings. You Should Have Been Nicer to My Mom by Vincent Torrado publishes on March 10th, and it follows a family in the wake of the passing of the patriarch of the family. In Poppy Ramon's will, he details that he made a deal with a demon and that one of the family members is that demon. The black sheep of the family, Ziamara, is the only one that seems to take this claim seriously, and everyone else is just kind of writing it off as the words of a senile man. So throughout the story, we follow Ziamara as she is trying to figure out who the demon is in her family. And of course, everyone starts turning on each other. It got to a point where it was like, I don't even think the demon is the scariest part of this book. This family is so dysfunctional. There are so many dark familial secrets that are revealed. This is a bit of a slow burn, but slowly you watch as these characters unravel across a period of 12 hours, and it's honestly giving like a locked room vibe because they're all just in this house together trying to figure out what all of this means. I really enjoyed the perspective of a Dominican family. I really don't know too much about that region of the world, and so it was really interesting to read about a family with that kind of heritage. Though this is more of a slow burn, it definitely had me on the edge of my seat and I was invested throughout. Aside from the main character, I found each of the characters very unlikable, and honestly, I wouldn't say that they were unlikable in like a you love to hate them kind of way. I just really thought they were insufferable. Definitely had my theory, and I kind of struggle a little bit with these kind of like lock room kind of vibes where like everyone's a suspect, because if anyone could be a suspect, then it's not really surprising when there is a grand reveal. That being said, I was surprised, but ultimately unsatisfied with the ending. Rating it 3.5 stars. Lila in the Flesh by Nick Roberts is available on Kindle Unlimited, and this follows Lila, who is an aspiring author, and she gets a very exclusive invite to the Claiborne residence, which is a writer's retreat in Italy at this like super big mansion castle. On the property, there is a unknown figure known as the Reader that lives on the top story of the residence, who is known as the world's best editor, but no one has ever seen this person. There's a bunch of rules at this place, and it becomes very clear to Lila that this writing residency isn't the dream that she thought it would be. Lila begins to dig into the secrets surrounding this program, and she stumbles upon way too much, and things take a very dark turn. This was atmospherically dark. It had a lot of sinister secrets. It had me on the edge of my seat, and I found the relationships and the dynamics between the characters to be very intriguing and mysterious. I had some theories of where I thought this was going, and I definitely was surprised by the ending. It definitely had a very sinister yet somehow satisfying ending that I really appreciated. The uncanniness of the characters throughout the story at various times really added this extra layer of just totally weird energy that just was really interesting to me. This book definitely unsettled me. It was a bit of a slow burn, but when the scary moments hit, they definitely hit. Overall, I thought this was really engaging and eerie read and very creative. I rated it 3.75 stars. Then in a reading vlog called Best or Worst Horror Books that is posted on my page, I read The Once Yellow House by Gemma Amor, which is available on Kindle Unlimited, as well as Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca. If you're interested in my thoughts on either of these books, you can go ahead and watch that reading vlog, but I rated The Once Yellow House by Gemma Amor 4.25 stars, and I rated Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca 2.75 stars to 3 stars. Lakewood by Megan Giddings was recommended many times by my friend Madison, and I've had this on my shelf for a while, and I'm so mad at myself that I didn't pick it up sooner because it is so good. It follows this girl named Lena, and after her grandmother passes away, she realizes that her family is in a ton of debt. So she gets involved in this research project that she has to lie about being a part of. It's at this remote town of Lakewood, Michigan, and this is a dystopian thriller to its core. Throughout the story, Lena is exposed to some really insane medical discoveries, just like life-changing type of stuff, and everything just is very uncanny, totally bizarre, and so unsettling. This book takes a look at things such as dysfunctional family dynamics and familial secrets, what one is willing to do in a time of desperation, racial injustice, racial medical injustice, exploitation, financial and bodily exploitation, and just really packs a punch. This is slightly fever dreamy, and it had me on the edge of my seat, invested the entire time, and I did not want to put this down at any point in the story, and I thought that the ending was very satisfying. I loved this. I'm rating it 4.5 stars. I Know a Place by Nat Cassidy publishes on May 5th, and this is a collection of short stories and novellas. When I started reading this, I very quickly realized that I had read like over half of the stories, whether they were standalones like Rest Stop and Generation and The Art of Getting What You Want, or if they were inside other collections of short stories. One of the stories I started reading, and then I was like, I know exactly how this is going to end. Why do I feel like I know the story? And then I realized I have a recording of Nat Cassidy reading it at StokerCon, and I've watched it so many times, so of course I knew the story. So I definitely jumped past all of the stories that I had already read before, and so I was able to fly through this a lot faster than I otherwise would have if I hadn't read those stories before. That being said, there were some new to me stories in there that I really enjoyed and was absolutely captivated by. Nat Cassidy is just one of those voices in horror that is just utterly gripping, addicting. He is so brilliant. The way he writes his characters is so real and raw. He just really understands the human experience. He knows how to write scenes that get under your skin. He knows how to make you laugh. He's just a really great writer and person. I just really recommend you picking up a Nat Cassidy book if you haven't yet. And if you want just like a little taste of his vibe, then maybe this would be the perfect place to start. That being said, I'm rating I Know a Place by Nat Cassidy 4.5 stars. I then read Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. I have to admit I'm not the biggest Grady Hendrix fan. I have struggled a lot with his characters and with his stories in general. But surprisingly, I didn't hate this one. It is about a group of girls who have been put into a home for wayward girls because they are pregnant and their families do not want them to be young mothers. So here these girls have fake names and they are supposed to have their babies and then give them up for adoption in private. The girls feel like everything is out of their control, and so one of the girls gets their hands on a book about witchcraft and they finally feel like they are back in control of their lives. Many of the critiques that people have about Grady Hendrix, and something that I can agree with to an extent, is that he's not really great at writing super dimensional women characters. But then on the flip side, you get a lot of people who say that he absolutely encapsulates what it's like to be a woman. And then we get into the whole conversation of whether or not men should be writing women's experiences. And, you know, that's not my place to decide. I didn't think that he did a terrible portrayal of women. I will say I can't speak to the critiques that he doesn't portray Black women well because that's not my experience living as a white woman. But I wasn't particularly offended by the way women were portrayed in this book. I will say I really enjoyed the social commentary on bodily autonomy. I think especially in this world, in this day and age, that is so important to women, and I appreciated the author letting us know where he stood on that issue through this book. I will say there was one scene that I thought was particularly graphic that didn't need to be that way, and it was kind of traumatizing to read, honestly, but I do understand why it took place. I also enjoyed how the characters all became friends and stood up for each other, and how they pushed back against this control, even if it meant they needed to become witches. I will say, while I wasn't offended by the portrayal of women in this story, I also wasn't blown away by the portrayal either. They are pretty one-dimensional characters, these kind of caricatures of how teenage girls would be in this situation. But this was campy and ultimately fun. But I will say I do understand why people don't like this book, and I do understand why people don't like his books in general. They're pretty hit or miss for me. I would say this one is mostly a hit, and I rated it 3.5 stars. Bodies of Work by Clay McLeod Chapman is a horror novella that publishes on April 7th, and this follows this guy who is an outcast of sorts, and ultimately he is a serial unaliver. This guy is an artist, and he has this art piece, so to speak, that is called The Butterfly Girls, and essentially he is using the voices of the women that he has unalived. But these women will not stay silent, and they begin whispering to him and whispering of revenge, and things get a little nuts. This is dark and unsettling. It is a page turner. It was so easy to fly through. It was weird and unsettling and utterly unique. I think that Clay McLeod Chapman just has such a unique voice in horror. He does a great job of really making you uncomfortable and then kind of making light of it at the same time. So you're laughing while also cowering. It's like a kind of vibe, if that makes any sense. I just think that he's such a fascinating person in general, and his work definitely reflects who he is. This is a great little novella. Definitely recommend it. I rated it 4.25 stars. The Valley of Vengeful Ghosts by Kim Fu follows a woman named Eleanor who, in the wake of her mother's passing, decides she's going to fill her mother's last request, which is to use her inheritance to buy a property. She visits a lot of properties, and they're all out of her budget, and she comes across this property that is part of a housing development that lost its funding. It is one of the model homes, and so she moves into it. Very quickly, a torrential downpour starts, and it will not let up, and this starts to expose some of the faults of the home's integrity, and the rain and the isolation starts to get to Eleanor's head, and she starts seeing the ghost of her mother and other ghosts of her past and present. This is sort of a fevery, literary, slow horror descent into chaos. I am somebody who really appreciates a slow burn and getting into the psyche of somebody who may or may not be losing their mind. That being said, this one was almost too uneventful for me. I will say I really appreciated the writing, and I appreciated the introspection into Eleanor's head and how she is grappling with the various things that she's gone through in her life. I think that I did myself a disservice going into this thinking that this would be a horror book, and not to say that it isn't. There's definitely a paranormal aspect to it, and there's definitely a psychological horror aspect to it. But I think that had I gone into this thinking this was more a story of a woman grappling with her grief and her regret and not focusing on the fact that it's a horror book, I might have enjoyed it more and gone into it with different expectations. That being said, I didn't think that this lacked a punch. Definitely lightly hit me in the gut at a couple of points. But I think that if you're going to go into this one, definitely be aware that it's more of a slow burn literary story about grief and regret versus a straight up horror book. I think this was a really good book. I just think that I wasn't in the right headspace for it. I'm going to rate it 3.5 stars tentatively, but honestly, I will probably be recommending this moving forward because truly there wasn't anything in this book that I didn't like. Again, I just think I was in the wrong headspace for it. My favorite book I read last week was Lakewood by Megan Giddings. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book was that you read last week.